Hey guys, it's Lucky Ghost here, and this video is going to be both a class guide and a build guide for the Druid for the launch of Diablo 4. This build is insanely tanky and does incredible damage, cleaves down groups of enemies without even trying, and has insane single target damage in boss fights. So let's dive in and talk about how this all works. This build dips a little bit into all things Druid. We've got a little bit of elemental damage, we're a little bit of an earth bender, and we also do a little bit of shape shifting while also having summons out that attack things for us. So this build kind of touches all the bases. The first skill we're going to take is our basic attack. Your basic attack is your generator, your resource generator, and it's always available to use anytime you're out of resources or all of your abilities are on cooldown. We're going to take Storm Strike, and the main reason we're going to take Storm Strike is that this passive right here, the second passive for it, says Storm Strike has a 50% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. Vulnerable, if you don't know, makes it so that the enemies take 20% more damage from you. That is a massive damage buff. So when we have such easy access to that buff, we're going to take it, right? This is just lightning gathers around your weapon. So you basically swing at the enemy and it does a little mini chain lightning to all the targets directly in front of you. It's a melee range ability. Enhanced Storm Strike is the first passive you grab. This makes Storm Strike have a 15% chance to immobilize all enemies for 2.6 seconds. So it has a small chance to stun enemies, which is nice. It feels good. And then of course the vulnerable that we talked about, this is huge. And this is the reason we're taking this. Next, we have our spender. So this is generating our resources, right? We're using that. And then we have our spender, our core ability. And the Druid has kind of a unique setup going for it, at least the one that I came up with here. We're going to be using 2 different core abilities, which I almost never recommend, but there's a reason for this. And that's because one of them, the pulverize ability, is we can only use this once every 12 seconds effectively. And if we wait until 10 seconds has passed before we're using it again, the pulverize will overpower as long as we remain healthy. So we start getting these stacks. And once we get to 12, we use this ability, and it's a massive AoE circle around you. And pretty much everything in that circle will die. I'll show you some footage of that on the screen right now. This ability looks like this and everything's dead, right? So it works incredibly well for big AoE damage, but only once every 12 seconds. In the meantime, as our like spammable, right, the ability that we spam when we want things to die, we're going to use Landslide. Landslide has insane damage scaling, and it's great for single target damage. It actually can hit a few targets at a time, but it's a pretty small radius. So this is more of your single target, double target, triple target damage. You're not going to be using this to clear entire like screenfuls of enemies, but the damage it does as single target is fantastic. And then you've got this one for your big AoE. Works really well in pair. After Landslide damages enemies 4 times, the next hit will immobilize enemies for a few seconds. And the next one, Primal Landslide. When you immobilize or stun an enemy, you gain a Terremote. Each enemy hit by Landslide consumes the Terremote, causing a guaranteed critical strike with 40% increased critical strike damage. Bosses always have a 10% chance to grant a Terremote when hit. So you're getting these Terremotes, and then when you use this ability, it's just doing a ton more damage. That's what you need to know there. As for passives from this section, there's actually some really nice ones. You've got Heart of the Wild, which is going to increase your spirit so that you can cast your Landslide a little bit more before running out. You get that extra cast in before you run out of resources, basically. And same thing with Wild Impulses. Your core skills cost 15% more spirit, but deal 30% increased damage. So that's a nice damage buff for these 2 abilities. As soon as you can, so don't spec into those passives relentlessly, right? Grab those as fillers. Like anytime you can't move down to the next part of the tree, it's saying you need to spend more points before you can get something down here. Then wait, you know, like that's when you put your points into these 2 passives right here, Heart of the Wild and Wild Impulse. But as soon as you can, you're going to want to unlock Earthen Bulwark. This is actually a really nice ability for 2 reasons. One is it gives you a little barrier, so because you're going to be walking into the middle of groups of enemies as part of your strategy so that you can pop off your pulverize. This pairs perfectly with that. It puts a shield around you that absorbs damage, and then it explodes for 189 damage, which is actually a substantial amount of damage. It's really solid. Earthen Bulwark makes you unstoppable while active, so you cannot be CC'd, and you can use this ability to break free from a CC. So if you get stunned, you get caught, maybe not paying attention, an enemy impales you with a sword, and you need to break free or you're going to die. Well, this skill, you can use it while stunned, while crowd controlled. You can use it to break free. And the next passive, Rock Shrapnel, flies outward when the bulwark is destroyed or expires, dealing damage. So it's not going to do damage to the enemies around you when it expires until you get that second passive. That's something to be aware of. So at first it's just a shield, then you get that second passive and now it does damage to enemies around you. Then we're going to work our way down here, right? You're going to work your way down to this next section by speccing into these passives and stuff like that, or in your landslide if you prefer. We're going to grab ravens. Ravens, yeah, dude, they are so good. And the reason they're so good has very little to do with their damage, which is decent. They've got a nice AoE attack. It's a nice round AoE attack. So like it works perfectly in unison with basically our rotation of walk into the middle of the mobs with our bulwark. You know, we're immune to damage. We drop the ravens down on the enemies, the big AoE damage on top of us. And this skill is going to make all those mobs vulnerable because of the second passive here. Enemies hit inside the swarm of ravens. When it is activated, become vulnerable for 3 seconds, right? So 20% increased damage to all enemies. And then we go kapow with the pulverize. Boom. And everything dies. And anything that has the nerve to not die when we do that is going to be mutilated by our landslide after the fact. So it's just a really beautiful synergy between those 3 abilities that we have, and then our finisher from our high single target damage, high like small multi-target damage landslide. In this section here, in our wrath section, I actually ended up not using any of these abilities. Boulder is actually really solid damage, but it pushes the enemies away from you in a really inconvenient way. If it manages to kill the enemies, they're a mile away and you got to run and grab their loot. So it's spreading enemies out rather than grouping them up, which just generally feels pretty rough in ARPGs, but it is really high damage. It is fun to use outside of the fact that it just disperses the enemies, pushes them away from you. And if they do die, they're like far away when they do, and you got to run and grab the loot. So just a lot of inconveniences come with this skill, but it is a lot of fun. And then for our ultimate, I decided against using them. None of these felt particularly awesome. I didn't love them as much as I loved these or abilities up here. And so I leaned into the core abilities, which felt really good for a starting build. And the great thing about this build is it does not require any legendaries to feel good. A lot of this stuff is just going to work innately. And then there is a really cool legendary we'll talk about for this. As for your boons, we don't have access to these at the time of the recording of this video. So be sure to refer to the written guide linked in the description down below for boon recommendations, as well as extensive legendary recommendations and where those legendaries are located. All of the build guides will have legendaries that are useful to you and how to get them, because some of these legendaries can be farmed from very specific locations. So you don't have to wait for one to randomly drop. Sometimes you can go into a specific dungeon and just get it instantly, right? That legendary aspect. But let's quickly touch on a couple of legendaries that are incredibly useful to this build in case you do find them. And the main one is going to be this one here. Landslides, Earth Pillars, each strike a second time and deal an additional 22% bonus damage per hit. That's huge, right? That is so much more damage. You're casting the skill once, but it's actually going off twice. So you're getting double the damage out of it, plus that 22% bonus damage. And that's really the one I wanted to show you that we found to be really useful for this build. So keep an eye out for it. But if you don't find it, it's not a big deal. There's a ton of other legendaries that you can use that are going to make this thing feel just fine. This is just going to really amp up your single target damage. I had a ton of fun building and playing this build. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe for more Diablo content. This is a brand new channel and it can definitely use that algorithmic love. If you're not sure what to do next, maybe consider watching one of the videos popping up on screen right now.